to another episode of Stuck in My Mind podcast. I am your host, Wize, and today's guest is here to challenge the way you think about growth. Ryan Gottfredson is a leadership professor, researcher, and author who specializes in vertical development. He helps leaders break free from the doing the better trap, the endless hustle for more credentials and responsibilities, and instead embrace the being better path where true transformation begins. Ryan Insights have helped leaders around the world stop burning out and start leading with confidence, clarity, and authenticity. Let's welcome Stuck in My Mind podcast, Ryan Gottfredson. Hello.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you creating this platform, and I've been excited to join you.
I appreciate you coming. So, Ryan, you say most high achievers are stuck on the doing better path. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've learned, and it's something that's been incredibly helpful for me, is to understand that we really have two different parts or sides of ourselves. And if you can kind of think on a horizontal axis, we have our doing side. This is our level of talent, our knowledge, our skills, and our abilities. But there's another side of ourselves that is the vertical axis. I call it our being side. And this is the quality of and sophistication of our body's internal operating system. So when you think our character, our mindset, our psyche, our emotional regulation abilities, that's what resides along our being side. And so to kind of just step into this a little bit, let me ask you a question. When people try to develop themselves, do they typically focus on improving their knowledge and skills or upgrading their internal operating system? What do you think?
Maybe upgrading their knowledge and skills.
Yeah, I mean, you think about our education systems, our athletic programs, our organizational development efforts are largely about what apps can I download, right? And that's great, and it's helpful because it broadens our functionality. But if we just download apps on us, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can do more complex things or navigate more complex environments. If we want that, we've got to focus on the being side development. And so, what I've learned for myself is, and this is times in my life I've been super frustrated, right? I don't know if you can relate to this. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew you had the knowledge and skills to be successful, but you still weren't successful?
Yes.
Right? That's been me in multiple instances in my life. And what I've come to learn is I used to think like, what is wrong here? Like I have the knowledge and skills, but it's just not working. Well, that's because I was only focused on the doing side. I had the doing side abilities, but I didn't necessarily have the being side abilities. And what I've come to learn when we understand our being side is most of the challenges that we have in our life are more connected to our being side than our doing side. Also, when we think about really great characteristics of people like humility, honesty, authenticity, vulnerability, patience, these are characteristics that exist along our being side. They really aren't connected to our doing side. And so if we could just separate those two sides out, what it does is it opens up a developmental strategy that most people aren't aware of, which is to focus on that being side. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. It always makes it is opening my eyes to some things that just one of the things you're saying. So yeah, no, definitely. So tell us about Cheryl's story. How did her doing mindset hold her back?
Yeah, so Sheryl is somebody I write about in my newest book. The book is called Becoming Better, The Groundbreaking Science of Personal Transformation. And in this book, I break down these two sides, the doing side and the being side. And Sheryl was a really great example of a coaching client that helped kind of bring these ideas to life. So I first got introduced to Sheryl by her manager. So Cheryl's manager reaches out to me. He knew that I did coaching. And he said, "Hey, Ryan, I've got an employee. Her name is Sheryl. And I really like Sheryl. But the reality is she's been in this position for 10 years. And it's time to either move her up or move her out. And I just don't know if she's capable of moving up. Can you do some coaching and let's figure out if we could get her up as opposed to get her out?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to meet Sheryl." So he connects us via email. And at the bottom of the email from Sheryl, because she responded first, is she had a bunch of letters after her name, and she had a bunch of stamps representing certificates in her email signature. And I remember thinking when I got this email, like, man, Sheryl is an incredibly qualified individual. Like, what's going on here, right? And so what I knew from that email is Sheryl had the doing side abilities. Now the question becomes, did she have the being side abilities? And so as I started the coaching process with Sheryl, started to get to know her, she expressed this frustration where she said, every year for the last 10 years, I've been passed up for promotion. And every year when I get passed up for promotion, I go get a new degree or a new certificate. And she's just telling me how frustrated she is that she's gotten all these degrees, all these certificates, and still hasn't gotten promoted. And so I walked her through an exercise that to help us kind of gain some insight on this. And here's what I learned is that while Sheryl has great knowledge and great skills, she also carried a fear that was holding her back from taking initiative. So Sheryl was really great about taking directions from others, but she had a really hard time taking initiative herself because she was afraid that if she took initiative and it didn't go well, then she would lose her job. And she was a single mom. And so she just felt, I need to make sure that I keep my job, which prevented her from taking initiative. So her leaders couldn't trust her to be a leader. And so this was not, again, an issue with knowledge and skills. It was dealing with her being side and some of the fears and insecurities that existed there. And by illuminating that for her, we were able to put her on a path to develop along her being side so that she could get out of this kind of stuck position and ultimately level up in the organization.
Awesome, awesome. So why do you think so many leaders and professionals equate growth with more hours, more credentials, more hustle?
Well, in a way, they're kind of incentivized to do so, right? I don't know about you, right? I follow sports quite a bit.
Hmm.
Like, how are athletes incentivized? Well, they're incentivized to win, to get yards, to score points, rack up the statistics, right? Because they know that the better the statistics, then the more they can get paid.
Yes.
And the same thing goes in an organizational environment, right? We are incentivized to essentially develop the knowledge and skills that will allow us to put numbers on the board.
Hmm.
And and so what we typically try to do is we try to gain knowledge or skills or work harder to get those numbers on the board. But what I've come to learn is that the best and most effective people, they're not actually the ones that are putting the most numbers on the board. They're not necessarily the hardest workers. They're generally the smartest workers, right? They're just operating at a being side altitude that exceeds those below them, right? It's in a way they're the people that are playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers, right? If you think about, in my mind, some really great coaches in history, people like Phil Jackson, Greg Popovich, Steve Kerr, some from the NBA, like, these are coaches that seem to be playing at a completely different level than everybody else. They're at a much higher level. And that's because they're higher up on their being side. Now, every coach, I think, knows the X's and O's, right? That's the doing side. But not every coach has the being side altitude to be able to create long-term success for the teams that they lead or coach. And so that's another reason why I think it's so important for us to be aware that we do have this being side, and it's maybe the most important side for us to invest in to be able to create greater value in the world around us.
So was there a time in your career where you realized you were stuck in a doing trap?
For sure, right? There's multiple times, but let me give you the one that I feel like is maybe the most extreme. So, to give you a little bit of backstory about myself, I graduated with my PhD at Indiana University. I had done my dissertation on leadership, and I took a job at Cal State Fullerton as a professor, where I could do research and teaching on leadership. And I was there for about 2 years. And honestly, I was feeling a little bit stuck. I was thinking, I don't know if I want to teach the same classes for the next 30 years.
Mm.
And at that time, I got a job offer to work with a consulting company. The company's Gallup. They do employee engagement consulting. And so I decided to try it out. So I took a leave of absence from the university and I joined Gallup. And I was thinking this would be a permanent career shift, even though it was a leave of absence. And I got into the role, and quite honestly, I was a little bit frustrated about it because I felt like I was joining to serve in one role, and they kind of put me in a different role. And I was a little bit frustrated about that. And so in the 10 months I was there, I was kind of increasingly complaining about being in the wrong position. And one particular day, I got on the phone with my manager. Something had happened, and I'm complaining to my manager about how I just was a little bit frustrated with how things are going. And mid complaining to her, she stopped me and she said, "Ryan, I'm going to stop you here. This clearly isn't working out. I'm going to have to let you go." And I got fired. And
Wow.
I never thought I would get fired. And I had this huge kind of waterfall of shame fall over me, right? I'm letting my wife down. I'm letting my kids down. I'm thinking, what does my future entail after this? And this is one of those times in my life where I knew I had the talent, the knowledge, and skills to be successful. But clearly I wasn't. I had just gotten fired. And so what I did is I decided to go back to Cal State Fullerton. I could do that because I had just taken a leave of absence. And in doing so, I revamped my research. And all of my research was focused on essentially how do we tap into this being side of leadership as opposed to the doing side. And I started to do research on mindsets. And as I started to learn about mindsets, what mindsets are out there, of course, I was introspecting about the quality of my mindsets. And what I learned through that process was that while I thought I had good mindsets, I actually didn't. I had mindsets that were holding me back. So while I had the knowledge and skills to be successful, I didn't have the mindsets to be successful. And that ended up being, I'm going to call that an inflection point that altered the trajectory of my life, because it opened up the door for me to do this being side work and become a better version of myself. And so that was what kind of started my personal transformation. Ultimately, it's what led to me writing my first book, Success Mindsets. And since then, I've written 2 others. So it's been a pretty remarkable journey. And what I've learned through this process is when we elevate along our being side, we open up opportunities for our future, and we open up opportunities for our impact.
Well, what are some signs someone listening might recognize in themselves that they're on the wrong path?
Well, I think it's, what is your emphasis, right? What do you feel like is your drive? What are you shooting towards? And here's kind of what I've learned is that generally people have one of 3 areas of emphasis. And I'll even share a little bit about my personal story as I go through these. So I would say, and the research backs this up, most people, their area of emphasis is safety, comfort, and belonging. And this is what I learned when I got fired. Like, that was how I was wired, was safety, comfort, and belonging. I look back on that time, and I think one of the ways that I know I was there was how I approached every day. Like, I kind of woke up every morning thinking, how do I get through today as easy as possible? Right? And that mentality, I'm not going to say it's terrible, but it surely is limiting,
Mm.
right? So that's one way we could be wired, for safety, comfort, and belonging. Another way that we could be wired is to stand out, advance, and get ahead. Right? When we're here, we want to be seen, we want to be recognized, and we want to kind of win. We're in a comparison with other people. And there's some value to that, because generally when we're here, we're more driven than if we're wired for safety, comfort, and belonging. But at the same time, there could be some negative side effects of kind of being driven in this way. So that's the second way that we could be driven. The third way that we could be driven is we're driven to contribute, add value, and lift others. Now, when we're here and in this mode, we don't care about being accepted or fitting in or being comfortable. And we don't care about standing out or being seen or being recognized. We care about the impact that we have. And so, what research has found is if we think about these three different ways that we can be wired, 64% of adults are wired for safety, comfort, and belonging. 35% are wired to stand out, advance, and get ahead. And only 1% are wired to contribute, add value, and lift others. But if we can get there, that's where greatness occurs. That's where impact occurs. And so I think that that's just hopefully just a really quick way for us to introspect about kind of where we are at in terms of our being and maybe where we need to go if we're not at that highest level.
So why do we confuse competence with confidence, and how does that sabotage us?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just society. I think we perceive society values people who are competent.
Mhm.
And it surely does. But when that becomes the metric of success, what I've learned is that people who are always want to demonstrate their competence, they end up only doing the things they know they will be successful at. And they don't necessarily step into learning zone challenges, right? Learning zone challenges are challenges that exceed our prior experience. These learning zone challenges are uncertain. They are scary. There's a greater ripeness for failure. And people who overly value competence rarely step into these learning zone challenges. They hold on to what's worked in the past, and they have a hard time embracing what might work better in the future. And what we've learned, and this comes from the mindset research on fixed and growth mindsets, but what we've learned is that if we can not, that our identity is separate from our competence, if we could create that separation, then we're much more willing to embrace these learning zone challenges, which is the secret to long-term growth and development and becoming better people.
Mm. So what is the being better path, and how is it different from traditional growth strategies?
Yeah, the traditional growth strategies, as we kind of mentioned, is to improve on our knowledge and our skills,
Mhm.
right? And that's actually what's called, I don't know if any of you are listening have heard this terminology, that's what's called horizontal development, is when we improve along our doing side. But if we want to improve along our being side, upgrade our internal operating system, that's what's called vertical development. And these two forms of development are quite different from each other, right? We're used to that horizontal development. Remember, this is our education systems, our athletic programs, our organizational development efforts.
Mhm.
And it is about kind of learning new things and practicing new skills.
Yeah.
But that's different than vertical development. Vertical development at its core is all about refining and upgrading our body's internal operating system, literally our body's nervous system. And what I've found is that there's kind of three different levels of vertical development activities that we can engage in. Is it okay if we dive into these three levels?
Yes, that's what we're here for.
All right, cool. So these three levels are going to start we're going to start talking about the surface level, then we'll get into a deeper level, and then the deepest level. Okay, so normally we start at that surface level and we work our way down. So at the surface level, these are activities like meditation, gratitude journaling or journaling, yoga, cold plunging, self affirmations, right? These are, right. Have you ever read the book Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins?
Yes.
right? So he uses a lot of these tactics earlier kind of in his life to kind of elevate himself. And what these tactics do, these surface level tactics, is they are starter level strategies for upgrading our body's internal operating system. We become better regulated when we engage in these activities. So those are the starter level strategies. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So then the deeper level strategies are, we get deeper and more specific about the wiring of our internal operating system. What is the programming that's baked in there? So when I work with groups, this is kind of the level I normally play at. And how I work, when I work with groups and people, I focus on mindsets. I think mindsets is one of the best ways to awaken to the wiring of our body. And in fact, if you're interested, on my website at ryangottfredson.com, I've got a free mindset assessment. So you could go there, take this assessment, which will give you results indicating the quality of your mindset. So that's a tool that's out there for you. But even another kind of exercise that we can engage in here is to think about our if-then programming, right? We all have this, but if we find ourselves in a certain situation, then how is our body wired to respond? So, for example, if I receive constructive criticism, then how does my body typically respond? Do I get defensive or do I create space for it? Right? Or if I get cut off in the freeway, then do I get angry or do I create space? Right? These are when we explore our if then programming, that's a deeper level strategy for awakening to our body's internal operating system. And when we get clarity on that programming, then we could do things to upgrade our programming. So that's the deeper level strategies. And then at the deepest level, this is generally when we bring in some professional help to help us out. And usually that involves some form of therapy. So that could be trauma therapy, that could be neurofeedback therapy, and even what research is, like some recent research is finding, is psychedelic assisted therapy is proven to be maybe one of the most effective ways of upgrading our body's nervous system. So those are the three levels: the surface level, the deeper level, and the deepest level.
So what initiatives have the biggest impact on leadership and fulfillment?
I missed the first part of that question. Do you mind asking that again?
What inner shifts have
Ah,
the biggest impact on leadership and fulfillment?
yeah, and that's why I focus on mindsets, because if we could shift and upgrade our mindsets, it'll change everything. Because here's what I've learned about mindsets. I think most people think about mindsets as being our attitude towards something. Right?
Mm,
I have an entrepreneurial mindset, or I have an abundance mindset. And it's not that those ideas aren't good. They're good ideas. But I don't think they get to the depth that we need to when it comes to our mindset. So our mindsets are more than our attitude towards something. They are the mental lenses that we use to view our world. In fact, our mindsets play three primary jobs, right? So our body in any given moment is sending signals from our senses to our brain. And the first job that our mindsets play is to filter information into our brain, right? It can't filter all information in, so it'll only filter in select information. And then, based upon that information filtered in, the second job of our mindsets is to assign meaning or interpretation to the signals that are filtered in. So, for example, if I am receiving constructive criticism, my mindsets will filter that in, and then it'll automatically assign meaning to that, right? That meaning could be, this constructive criticism is an attack. That could be one way we assign meaning. Or it could assign the meaning of, here's an opportunity to learn. And depending upon the meaning assigned, then our mindsets, and this is the third job of our mindsets, is to activate our response to the information filtered in and how it's interpreted. So if we see constructive criticism as an attack, then our mindsets will guide our body and kind of say, you got to put up your shield, get defensive. But if our body interprets constructive criticism as an opportunity to learn, then it'll keep the shield down and we'll want to step towards that. Not that we have to agree with it, but it's an opportunity to learn. And so when we understand that our mindsets are essentially play these three roles,
Hmm.
then we can understand that our mindsets are the most foundational aspect of everything that we do, because they shape how we think, how we learn, and how we behave. And so that's why I think it's so critical for leaders and people to awaken to their mindsets and do work to improve their mindsets. Because if we could shift our mindsets, that'll change everything about how we operate.
So how can leaders recognize when it's time to stop doing and start being?
Yeah, well, and that's a great question. And because in order for us to realize that, we need to deepen our self-awareness.
Mm,
And that's an inherent challenge, because not everybody likes to look inward, and not everybody has the tools to look inward.
yeah.
And that's part of the reason why I developed my mindset assessment. Is it provides I would say a pretty objective way to look at the quality of our mindsets. Because what I've learned is that the deeper we go inward in terms of our self-awareness, the greater our capacity to elevate along our being side. Now, here's what I've learned. I've had over 50,000 people take my mindset assessment. Only 2.5% are in the top quartile for the 4 sets of mindsets that are evaluated.
Mm,
So the reality is that most of us have some mindset work to do, myself included. But here's what's tricky about this. If you're in a room full of 100 leaders or 100 people, and we ask them, do you have bad or low quality mindsets? I don't think anybody would say yes. I think everybody thinks that they have good mindsets. But the reality is that most people don't. And that's kind of where I found myself when I got fired from my consulting job. Is I thought I had good mindsets. But as I started to learn about mindsets, I very quickly realized there's better mindsets to have than what I had. And I think that maybe there's a valuable takeaway from my experience, and I've seen this with most people who end up doing this being side work. Is oftentimes it takes, I'm going to call, a heat experience to kind of open up our eyes to start looking inward. Right? For me, it really did. It took getting fired for me to actually have the motivation to do that introspective work. And so I think a heat experience is oftentimes part of the equation of doing the deep being side transformational work.
Awesome. So why is this framework so powerful for preventing burnout?
Well, when we understand our being side ultimately is our generator of, I'm going to say, energy. Right? And then it can employ our knowledge and skills, our doing side, to get things done. So here's what's interesting about this. I work with executive teams quite a bit. And one of the questions that I'll commonly ask executives is, do you spend any time during a week investing in yourself and your own development? And most of them say, no, I don't have the time to do that. They're incredibly busy people. And I get it, right? That makes sense. But here's what I've learned is that if somebody isn't investing in themselves, they're not filling their tank. And as an executive, when you're an executive, throughout your day, everybody else in the organization is essentially pulling from your tank. And the more that we get pulled from our tank and the less that we add to our tank in terms of our own investment in ourselves, the more burned out we feel. And so the reality is that if we want to have a larger tank and if we want to have more in our tank, we've got to do this being side development work, because that's ultimately what fills and enlarges our tank.
So, what practical steps can someone take today to start moving towards being better?
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes back to the three different levels that we talked about: surface
Mhm.
level, deepest level, right? If you're new to doing being side development work, I think you need to start with, figure out at least one of these things that will help: meditation, journaling, gratitude journaling, yoga, cold plunges, right? For me, actually, maybe I'll tell a story. This also was something that happened in the aftermath of getting fired, and ended up being incredibly helpful for me. So I had just gotten fired. I took the job back at Cal State Fullerton. And as part of my responsibilities at the university, I went around, I was meeting with some leaders in our community. And I went and met with the CEO of a roofing company here in Orange County, California. And this guy is awesome, charismatic leader. And almost immediately upon meeting him, he says, "Hey, I've got a book for you, and it's going to change your life." And I remember thinking, "Oh, awesome. This guy is so cool. I can't wait to hear what type of book it is." And he goes and grabs the book, brings it back to me. And here's the book that he gave me. I'll show it to you. It's called The 5 Minute Journal.
Mm.
And I look at it, and outwardly I'm very gracious. "Oh, thank you so much for this book. This is great." But inwardly I'm thinking, who the hell do you think I am? There is no way that I'm going to journal. Like, my mom was a journaler. I've got boxes of her journals. I don't know if I'll ever read, right? So I was just like, "Oh, this is lame." So I come home with the book and I go to throw it in the trash. And I kind of had this spiritual epiphany. I saw this leader in my mind's eye, and I heard the leader say, "This book will change your life." And so, kind of mid throwing the book away, I reel it back in and I open it up and I look at it. Okay, well, on every page, there's an inspirational quote. And then it invites me every morning to answer three questions. One, what are three things I'm grateful for? What are three things that would make today great? And then, what are some self affirmations? And I look at this, I was like, "Oh, that's pretty simple. Like, this guy says it's going to change my life. Let me give it a shot." So I started doing this. And I told myself I'll do it for 2 weeks. If I'm experiencing some benefits, I'll keep doing it. If I don't, the book's going in the trash. But long story short is I've been doing this for the last 8 years.
Wow.
Right? That's the impact that it's had. Because what I learned for me is this is a great exercise that I do every morning to activate higher quality mindsets.
Mm.
Right? So I told you before, I used to wake up every morning thinking, how do I survive today? Or how do I get through today as easy as possible? But when I started to answer the question, what are three things that would make today great? I started to feel this shift where I started to care less about surviving my day. And I started to wake up thinking, how do I make the most of today? And so this was an incredibly helpful tool to help me shift my mindsets from a prevention mindset, which is what I had, to a promotion mindset. And this is one of those starter level strategies. So this is a tool, a journaling tool that worked for me. I don't know if it'll work for everybody, but it's something that worked for me. I've now added to, so that's part of my daily ritual. Also, part of my daily ritual is meditating. So I use an app called Insight Timer. And those are a couple of elements of my daily ritual to help fill my tank and help me bring the best version of myself to every day.
See, you've answered my next question. um, so, what role does vulnerability and self awareness play in leadership?
Yeah, great question. And let me throw a question back at you.
Hmm.
How do you think most people see vulnerability? Do they? It's a sign or a signal of what?
Weakness. Yeah.
All right. So most people see it as a sign of weakness, and they're apprehensive to be vulnerable, right? Because our body feels like if I'm vulnerable, I'm exposing myself
Hmm.
to some form of criticism or attack. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, vulnerability is literally kind of opening up, right? Being unguarded. And so it feels scary and it feels uncomfortable. So our body's natural wiring is to avoid vulnerability. We see it, and therefore we see it as a sign of weakness.
Hmm.
But what I've come to learn is that vulnerability is actually not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's really only the strongest people that are willing to be vulnerable. And so when we understand these ideas, it's easy to recognize that vulnerability is not a doing side knowledge or skill. It is a being side ability. So the higher we go along our being side, the greater our willingness to be vulnerable, and also simultaneously, the greater our ability to have a positive impact on the groups and the people that we lead.
So, where do you see this framework making the biggest impact in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I feel like this is the wave of the future for personal and leadership development. We've spent almost all of our time up until now doing the doing side development.
Hmm.
And in a way, that's kind of become table stakes.
Yeah.
Everybody's, I'm not going to say everybody, but there's a lot of people who are talented, knowledgeable, and skillful. And so people no longer really stand out when it comes to their talent, knowledge, and skills. The reason why people stand out is ultimately because of their being side, their ability to navigate complexity, handle pressure. I mean, for example, let's look at Major League Baseball,
Mm.
right? I mean, we've got Major League Baseball, triple A, double A, single A, rookie league, right? Filled with all sorts of players who are incredibly gifted when it comes to their talent, their knowledge, and skills. But generally, what sets people apart is less about their skills and more about their mental fortitude in a high pressure game where failure is the norm, right? I think a classic example of this, I don't know if you've seen the movie Moneyball that features Billy Beane, who ultimately becomes the GM of the Oakland Athletics. But they highlight his playing career, right? They called him a five-tool player, this great prospect. He had all the tools to be successful, but he ultimately wasn't. Why? Because he didn't have the mindsets to be successful as a player. He got into a batting slump and he was never able to get out of it. And so that says much more about his being side than about his doing side. So I think what this framework does is it opens up a new developmental strategy. And I think what we're going to see is more organizations and more people are going to be focusing on the being side, because ultimately, if we could be a first mover in this space, it's going to be a competitive advantage for us.
Awesome, awesome. So what's your ultimate vision for leaders, for organizations, for the world?
Well, man, it is that we make this being side and being side work more well known. So that's one answer, but let me take it even deeper. Because here's what I've learned through my research and doing work with leaders is one of the primary factors that impedes our being side altitude is trauma.
Hmm.
So what I've found is that the more trauma people experience, the more their body's internal operating system is wired for self-protection. Right? And that makes sense, right? The more trauma we experience, the more hurt we have experienced, our body's nervous system is more wired to protect us, to keep us safe, right? And so while our nervous system, and that's our nervous system's job, is to protect us and keep us safe. But if it is too hyper vigilant at doing so, it also holds us back. And so what I've learned is that when we are finding people who are lower on their being side, more self-protective, and oftentimes we'll see this in leaders. We just have bad leaders. Well, why do we have bad leaders? Oftentimes it's connected to past trauma that has gone on in their lives. And so the reason why I bring this up is because it leads to, I think, a really meaningful takeaway, which is if we want to elevate along our being side and become the better versions of ourselves at a very foundational level, we're going to have to focus on healing our mind, our body, and our heart. And when we talked about those three different levels of being side development, the surface level, deeper level, deepest level, those are all efforts that will help us to heal our mind, body, and heart.
If listeners take just one thing away from this conversation, what should it be?
Well, I hope we've opened up a new perspective and new developmental opportunity, which is all about the being side. I just wish I had learned about this sooner in my life. Um, it took me getting fired and the frustration and shame of that to start to do this work. And what I hope for our listeners is that you don't have to wait to get fired or for a bad thing to happen or for a heat experience to occur to be able to do this work of transforming and elevating ourselves.
Thank you so much. Now we've become part of the show where you get the screen, the solo screen, the spotlight screen, and you get to plug away and let everybody know where they can find you, websites, everything.
No, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and appreciate you for listening. If I hope that these ideas inspire you to become a better version of yourself, and if I can help you in the pursuit of that, I want to. Maybe the best place to access me is my website, ryangottfredson.com. As I mentioned, I've got some free assessments there that can be really helpful to you. In fact, if you were to take one of those assessments, you'll get some automatic results. And if you reach out to me, I'll gladly jump on a call to walk you through your results. So you could connect with me on my website or really any social media channel. I'm most active on LinkedIn and would love to connect with you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being such a great guest. I appreciate your time. Don't leave just yet. Let me just close out the show and we'll chat a little bit off the air. But thank you so much, man. This has been a wonderful episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for I know creating a podcast isn't easy. So thank you for the work and effort that you put in to allow people like me to bring ideas into the world that will hopefully change lives.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right, everybody. Another great episode is in the can. I'm having so much fun with these last few episodes. They've been so amazing. If Ryan's message hit home, go visit RyanGottfredson.com and check out his resources on vertical development. And if you've been feeling stuck on the hamster wheel of doing more, share this episode with a friend or colleague who needs to hear this shift. Stay aware, stay evolving, stay wise. You know how your boy Wize does it. Peace out.